This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Regina Linke. You're an author, illustrator, art storyteller, and we're going to talk about the power of visual narratives, which is going to be the focus today. And I want to thank you for being on the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I would just to give the audience a heads up. I'm a big art fan. I'm a musician. I like talking to
Yeah.
creatives, but I grew up with like Marvel, DC, EC Comics. And then I got into like Japanese like anime and manga, like if people understand like Speed Racer or Mach Go Go, and this is Chinese art. This is like
hmm
and this is something like the gong by is like called gongbi style. Is that how you say it?
it's pronounced gongbi. Yeah.
Gumby style,
Uh-huh.
and I don't think as many people are familiar with that. Maybe I'm don't not aware of it. But your property, the thing that got you going, is a web comic, right?
Yeah. It started out as a webcomic on Instagram about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, it combined East Asian philosophy with this ancient Chinese gongbi painting, which dates back more than 2,000 years. And it's funny that you mention manga and comics because it is very similar. There's the line work, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's the really bright color and the colorful detail and the expressive action. And so it's almost like this ancient tradition, this precursor to modern day comics and comic art. So
Well, it's
it's
cool to get
fascinating.
that history because you go back and you look in at least in the Western world, you look at people like Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Walt Disney, Felix the Cat. You go back and look at that kind of
hmm
original kind of art, cartoon work or comics work that came from like the newspaper, the Sunday Funny,
Sure.
and then transmuted into the physical books.
hmm
But they realized that there's work that was before that. And if
Yeah.
you're an archaeologist, you can see it in all types of cultures, indigenous cultures, and in the U.S. into it as Native American, you can see their artwork
Sure.
on walls and different vases and all kinds of things.
hmm
But the idea of like art being used for like storytelling, but outside of like the narrative of a novel or a short story, is that kind of like where you like to focus? Because you're an artist, so you like to tell your stories through painting or line work, right?
Yeah. So I think, especially from a visually artistic perspective, I think the visual arts paintings, uh, the paintings on the urns or on the cave walls and things like that, it's part of this really long historical relationship that humans have had with artistic expression. So you mentioned music before when we were chatting. I would put it in the same family as even dance
Hmm.
or food, and that we have such a long relationship with it that it almost transcends language, modern
Yeah,
language,
it's
and
like
even
nonverbal.
modern, yeah, even modern literacy, right? Like the printing press was only invented relatively short time ago if you look at our long history of storytelling. And so I really do think that it's a powerful medium still to tell a story, to tell a narrative. And if we look at comics, it does still lean very heavily into the visual side, in which words and pictures go hand in hand in order to express a feeling, in order to set a mood or a scene. And it's a tool that I really like to still use because it doesn't require someone to under it's not tied to any language or meaning
Yeah,
ascribed to
it's like
language.
the movement and the story
Mhm.
and the representation of the art, is what I always liked is the nonverbal. Like being a musician, like when I like to write a lot of like instrumentals
Mhm.
because that's kind of like the core. Like when you add lyrics, it's a different type of thing. You're a singer songwriter, you add lyrics, you tell a story with it. But I think you can tell a story like classical music
Mhm.
just through the movement of the sound.
Sure.
So how you can crescendo, decrescendo, be louder,
Yeah.
be speed up, build up, have
Mhm.
silences, have layers. You can tell stories, and
Yeah.
people can imagine what we call sound painting.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
So the idea of musicians, when we get really into it, we get to this sound painting kind of concept.
Mhm.
George Martin with the Beatles talked about it. Hendrix talked about it. They had interviews with them, they would describe music in terms of like colors
Mm,
and
mhm.
more visual than you would expect. And
Yeah.
I think that nonverbal nature of communication through like a filmmakers, they storyboard.
Right,
They'll,
right.
they'll actually storyboard. I've talked to a lot of directors, and they'll have artists storyboard out scenes
Mhm.
because they're the visual. And a lot of times in movies, you don't even say anything. The actor doesn't say anything. It's like what they're doing with their face,
Mhm.
what they're
Yep.
doing with their eyes, what they're doing with their hands, with their body.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of communication that's done in that way. And then when you're able to illustrate, you kind of that's your wheelhouse. You're
Mhm.
dealing with all those elements of nonverbal communication.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's something that, in the everyday we might not notice because it comes so naturally to us. So much of our everyday communication can be nonverbal as well, but it's so innate to our universal understanding and cultural understanding that we it just doesn't even register, but those that can still be employed in right, in movies, in stories, in artwork to, convey an idea and convey a narrative.
So in the style that you're using, what made you drawn to this particular Chinese style?
You could probably say it's my type A side. So, I think a lot of folks, especially in the Western world, think of an artistic life as something that's very free flowing and very independent of external influence. But it was actually very different for me because I started learning this style of painting when I was living in Taiwan, and the painting studio that I started taking classes from was a very traditional, very old school kind of craftsman atelier.
Mm,
And you see this a lot in Japan too. I don't know if you've seen the movie like Jiro Dreams of Sushi, in which like a novice has to like be the like make the rice properly and
yeah.
this like test of like how good the rice is before he's even allowed to like pick up a
Do
knife and
anything else.
start,
Do anything else.
right, do
You gotta
anything
start.
else. Yeah,
Yeah, you
and
gotta start
so
with basics.
yeah, exactly. And so it was a very similar experience for me learning this very old, very traditional style of Chinese painting. You had to understand all of your materials very well, the ink that you had to use, the consistency. Like if it's too thick, then you're not going to get the effect that you want. If it's diluted too thin, then it's just going to turn gray in a
Mhm.
week. It's not going to stay like that really dark black line that you want. And then, as soon as like when you slowly master each step, then they give you a little bit more to play with. And then, once you're basically allowed to paint, you're not just painting whatever you want. You're actually expected to reproduce old classic paintings from like
Oh,
1,500 years ago. You're supposed to reproduce what the masters painted.
wow, so you have to start with,
Yeah.
like a classical musician, you're on
Yeah.
Chopin and Beethoven and Bach,
Exactly.
but
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
lot of musicians, we have to start with that kinda canon. You have to
Mhm.
start
Yes.
in the canon, and then once you get to a certain level, you get your 10,000 hours, and then you can break away and
Yeah.
start to say, "Hey, well, maybe I'm gonna break the rules of the canon and do a little bit different."
Mhm.
But,
Yeah, exactly.
is there
Um
like a line art aspect to this type of work? Because I'm just gonna show a screenshot of your website,
Sure, yeah. Mhm.
and I mean, it looks really detailed. Is it done with like a pencil type of structure? I mean, and then painted? Is that how you do this?
Mhm. Yeah. So the first step really is like making comics. It starts with a basic sketch, and then the second step is the line work. And the line work for Gombi is probably the most important aspect of it because depending on how the pressure is applied to the line, you get a thicker line, you get a thinner line. You can use diluted ink to symbolize something that's a little farther away, or a thicker line that shows that it's closer. Something that's harder, like a rock, will have, a certain texture to it, a certain
Hmm.
tooth to it, versus something that's soft and natural, like a leaf or a flower petal. That's going to be different as well. And so there's a lot of emphasis placed on lines and line work. And a lot of time, a lot of those 10,000 hours goes into practicing lines. And then the next step is really your base color, blocking out different sections, seeing how the colors kind of contrast with each other. And then it takes on almost like a Western style oil painting
Mm.
process, where you're glazing it, like little by little, layering on more and more depth in terms of color, in terms of shading. And and you have to wait for things to dry in between.
Wow.
And so a lot of this can take a long time. And we're really just looking at the picture as a whole, making sure that it's reflecting the harmony that is so common to Chinese and East Asian painting, a balance of light and dark, of things that are very open and expansive, the negative space, versus things that are very crowded together, like
Yeah.
trees or forests and things like that. Yeah.
Well, I love the fact. I mean, it's very detailed, and you really like your main character, like the actual environment is got a bigger like frame. It's
Hmm.
more going. They're kind of Oxford Boy himself is like small in the picture.
Yeah.
You see the environment that he's in and the detail. And a lot of times today, like you don't, people use so many digital tools. So I was
Hmm.
gonna ask, like, when you did the web comic, was it coming from scans of you actually doing the painted in line work by hand and scanned in, or did you start to convert it into the more modern like Adobe tools?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I first started the comic using analog tools. So using my traditional brushes, which you see back here, and using what's called xuan paper, which is made from rice straw. And it's actually a really thin paper. It's almost as thin as tissue paper.
Wow.
But because it's made from rice straw, it has a natural, almost waterproof like quality. So it doesn't tear, and it's been preserved, and there are paintings painted on this kind of paper that has lasted like 1,000 years, and it's been preserved very well. So I started using those materials first because that's what I was taught to use, right? But like you said, as I went through the process of studying with my teacher, he told me a funny thing. He was like, well, for an American, you're pretty good.
Mhm. Yeah.
And because I was born and raised in Texas, and moving back to Taiwan was a bit of a culture shock for me, because that's just, I mean, even though my parents were Taiwanese, just living there day to day was a completely different experience. And
Yeah.
so
Cultural.
my teacher said, like, okay, yeah, your skills are passable, but you're never going to be a great gongbi painter simply because you didn't grow up here, and you didn't
Hmm.
grow up with the philosophy ingrained in the heart and the spirit. Because I think underneath it all, I still have a pretty Western perspective on things.
Hmm.
And and he actually gave me permission to branch out
To branch
because
out.
he said, like, the road was closed for me on the Asian front.
But that's interesting though, because then still, like, if you have the hybrid approach with like a Western and
Yeah.
Eastern approach, you're still bringing this art to the other part of the world,
Sure. Yeah.
and it's sometimes like you're not like in the canon, right? You're
Hmm.
not like somebody who's a classical. All they do is like Bach and
Right.
Beethoven, and they never branch out
Yeah.
into any other form. But it's kind of when you cross genre, when you bring
Hmm.
like some manga or anime or comic book style into something and saw the connection where like this looks like comic books might have come from this,
Hmm.
right? Or
Hmm.
manga came from this. People
Yeah.
actually,
Potentially. Yeah.
yeah. So you're able to bring something that it's its own thing now. So
Hmm.
then you
Yeah.
establish a new frame.
Right. Yeah, and that's exciting. And so, yeah, when my teacher told me that, he really, I mean, he had a lot of foresight, right? He was like, there are people in China right now who have been practicing this art form since they were like 10 years old. Like you're not going to be able to compete with them.
Mhm.
and and so he's like, you really should combine your understanding of Western style composition, color, usage, the manga and the comic tradition that developed both in Japan and in the US, and see like what you can make of it when you mix it together. And so that's when I felt more comfortable actually moving into
Get to that.
digital tools.
Yeah, it gives you that
Yeah.
permission structure. 'Cause like I'm a child of the '70s,
Mhm.
and I grew up with, comic books that weren't on computer. Get like
Right.
Kirby's, Neil Adams, Ditko, Frank
Mhm.
Miller when they were actually not using computers.
Right.
And there was something about that I was drawn to. I would go to comic conventions, get artwork signed, and I was just really drawn to, like, every book. I knew who the artists were. I knew who the pencils were. I knew who the inkers were. I knew who the colorists were, and
Mhm.
I was really appreciating it, and then I started diving into other forms, like, looking at the old Warner Brothers, Disney films, Felix the Cat,
Mhm.
all, the in film, the film work that was done, especially the old Disney stuff and some of the
Yeah.
early Warner Brothers cartoons, and the level of detail in the backgrounds and the colors, and then you see, like,
Yeah.
the Hanna-Barbera age, and it's like, "What?
Mhm.
How come it's not as detailed anymore?" How come it, like, dropped off? There was, like, all this work being done.
Yeah.
And then people say, "Well, maybe it's too much work being done. Let's kind of bring it down to more simple backgrounds."
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's why I
Especially for
got
television, right? So,
yeah, and then I got drawn into anime, which was going the opposite direction, like, more detail,
yeah.
more stuff going on. There's a lot more work going into it than what the American cartoons were doing.
Mhm.
And then I said, "Whoa, like, what else can I look at?" So now my eyes are open now, like in this style, which I've never
Yeah.
really, been aware of. So I think
Mhm.
it's cool to bring, like, people who appreciate art, let them know there's other places, like, other places to go. They might
Mhm.
they might be stuck in what they know.
Yeah.
Open your eyes to a more expansive
Mhm.
set of work.
Yeah, it's really exciting to feel like, I mean, and I think that there's a lot of nostalgia in, going back and watching the things that I used to when I was a kid. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, part of growing up is also branching out and seeing what else is out there, because at every age there might be something different that speaks to you.
Yeah, like, with Oxherd Boy, were you surprised that resonated as a web comic? Not coming from, like, the manga tradition, not coming from the American comic book tradition or a Disney film tradition, but you had this, like, other style that,
Mhm.
that resonated with people. And do you feel it resonated because of the story or because of the art, or a combination of everything?
Um, yeah, so I guess the big surprise for me about the Oxford Boy was, as I was combining 2 different ancient traditions, um, it was surprising that the philosophy aspect resonated with so many people, because these are not new ideas, these are ideas that have been around for, a really long time, and it surprised me though that, uh ideas that were presented by a bunch of dead guys from thousands of years ago still still
Still
ring true
resonate?
for people in the modern day. But I think, the fact that it was paired with, a child, so 3 characters, a child, this his family ox, and this cute little rabbit that lives in his garden. I think it humanized those wisdoms and made it just a little bit more approachable.
Mhm.
And so I think that was the appeal of the webcomic, is that philosophy doesn't have to be super deep sometimes. I mean, I think it can be a lot of fun to go down those rabbit holes and
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and talk about philosophy in that way. But for everyday people like me, I really like just, being able to distill a single message and make it approachable, make it feel
We'll get the hook.
friendly.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
a musician when we get the hook. It's like
Mhm.
if you're a musician and you're putting down all this music and people are like, will go like, "Where's the hook?" Like
They're
like
waiting
like
for it.
they say, like, it doesn't have a hook, it's not gonna work, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're trying to it's a you have the philosophy, but you gotta have that hook that bring people in.
Mhm.
and make it like, like, and I'm in software design, and a lot of times overly complex things, people will come back and architect will say, "You know what? Keep it simple, remember? Keep it simple 'cause
Mm,
the
yeah.
more overly complex, and maybe it's cool to you, but it's so close to it, right? But nobody else is gonna get it, right? So
Yeah.
you gotta get people to get drawn in and wanna stay in, right?
Yeah,
That's
right.
kinda like the thing as, like, being a creator, is like, how do you get somebody in this
Mhm.
age of low attention span
Right,
to get
yeah.
drawn in and stay in?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's true, and it reminds me of, something that Albert Einstein had said is, "If you can't explain an idea to a six-year-old, then you don't really understand it at all," and so I guess, yeah, like, leaning into the six-year-old explanation is what
Yeah,
I'm
but
doing.
it does make sense because people only wanna spend, like, 15 seconds,
Yeah,
30
yeah.
seconds before they decide if they pass or they take it,
Mhm.
right?
Right, right.
And when if you have something that really draws people in,
Mhm.
um, then that's how you can get people to understand it, but, like, I think there are commonalities no matter what culture it comes from, but people get pulled into these stories, and sometimes the old stories,
Mhm.
like, people reuse, like, stuff that's in the Bible, stuff that's in the Iliad,
For
stuff that's in
sure.
King Arthur, no matter what, like, a lot of, like, fantasy novels is just repeating King Arthur. It's
Yeah,
repeating the
yeah.
structure of the Bible, it's repeating some core
Core
Shakespearean thing.
themes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they get
yeah.
reused. Science fiction's able to kind of throw it into a different world. Fantasy will throw it into a different world, and
Yeah.
then, dynamics of relationships, so people can take some Shakespearean stuff and put it into a modern day drama.
Mhm. Yeah, I
So
love it.
it just gets people just repeat, but they make it so, like, maybe you didn't feel that it was that obvious,
Right.
like, but it's there. When
Yeah,
you
yeah.
construct it, you find out it's like, well, yeah, it's kinda got a Shakespearean theme, so
Mhm.
I think that's not actually really new, but it seems new.
No, yeah, it and I think that is part of each generation's, artistry, right? To translate things that are true to everyone, that feel true, that have been true for generations. And I think each generation's artists really have the opportunity not to be completely original because they're not, we're not, I'm not,
Mhm.
but rather to harmonize their voices, harmonize their creativity in a way that opens and makes it available to their generation and to the people that they're in touch with. And so I think that's a very powerful thing and a very powerful role for artists to play.
But you're coming from, like I mentioned, like, Shakespearean stuff, King Arthur, but you're coming from Taoism, Buddhism,
Mhm.
Confucianism,
Yeah.
um, so so that from coming from those spaces, you're trying to bring some of these themes into the modern world
Mhm.
through
Sure.
your characterizations, and, so when you start, like, with your stories, how do you, like, outline? Do you have a general world building concept?
Mhm.
I've talked to, like, authors, and some of them are very detailed in the outline. Some of them are more like flow state, kinda have a idea,
Mhm.
but let it come to them from, like, the muse. It's coming to them, but they have a general frame. But is each work kind of its own thing, and it comes from different places?
Yeah, so I think it would be, the latter. Each work will generate come from a different space. Sometimes it's, yeah, like the muse, the inspiration. You just have a great idea and you can't wait to put it down on paper or on the iPad or whatever.
Mhm,
But others are uh, a practice, a habit of really answering some questions, posing questions, answering them, outlining different details, what works, what doesn't, going through it with a fine tooth comb until it finally makes sense. And so the webcomic itself started more as a practice. I really wanted to practice painting more. And my son was like 4 at the time. I was living in Taiwan, far from family. So I wasn't dedicating a lot of time to practicing my art because unless I made it a priority, it would just fall by the wayside.
mhm.
And so that was a habit that I wanted to develop. And but then the yeah, for as the comics kind of grew and I got more used to it, then it became more flow state. And there were opportunities for me to engage with followers and talk to them about what they were going through in their lives. And our conversations would kind of lead to, you know what, we should just collaborate on something and we should illustrate this challenge that you're going through and like what helped you through it. And
Mhm.
that was a lot of fun to do. Um, and then, my picture book, it also developed organically from this idea that, well, what is the story that is behind these characters? Because I was showing a lot of this work to my son, who's 8 now,
Mhm.
but he just started asking questions. You know, it's like, well, how did the boy and the ox become friends in the first place? And I was like, well, that's a really good question. Like, let's dive into this. Let's,
Yeah. Yeah, so
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the kind of the cool thing about the American comic book industry, initially was, like, every
the
month.
origins. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you have this, but every month you had to keep it going
Oh,
30
right,
days.
yeah, the
Yeah,
serial
30 days,
aspect
the
of
kind of
it.
serial thing.
Yeah.
So that
Mhm.
in that nature, like, you have this general idea, you might have planned it out, but there's a lot of flow state to hit the deadline.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
because if you serialize things and you're kinda on the hook to actually produce it,
Mhm.
then that can eventually sometimes you go in the timeline is kinda, like, fluid.
Mhm.
You can
Yep.
go and, like, go and reinvent a past to match where you are or match where you're going, and so things go
Yeah.
out of sequence, and I saw this with filmmakers because 'cause they'll shoot scenes, like,
Yeah, out of order, right?
out of
Yeah.
order just because of the site they have. It's like, "Oh, I got a
Mhm.
site license today, so I can actually shoot this scene," which is not actually in sequence with the last couple of scenes, it's totally
Yeah.
all over the place, but then it makes them rethink things, and then when they go to edit, they say, "Oh, this doesn't work, this does work,"
Yeah,
and
right, right.
move
I need
things
to fill
around.
this in. Yeah, yeah. It's
So
really neat. Mhm.
yeah, so it's all fluid. A lot of people think things are sequential, but a lot of times things are out of sequence. But
Mhm.
in terms of, do you find yourself going back and like, "Oh, I need to backfill this," or "I need to explain what this is," or go, take an Easter egg and go and like, oh, say, it wasn't an Easter egg and then it becomes an Easter egg.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, that's really interesting. Yeah, I didn't even think of, yeah, the serialization of comics and how it the pressure to kind of meet that deadline, you know, opens you up to like alternate options and then yeah, piecing them together again. I would say that that happened a lot when the Oxherd Boy, the book came out because when I was doing the webcomic, yeah, like I was putting things out, but I wasn't really worried about the sequence because each comic was pretty much standalone.
Mhm.
But when you put it into a book, you know, there I mean, the
You have to tie it
person
together.
reads from front to back, right? They're
Yeah,
not gonna, and sometimes they might just jump around. It's true, but you know, generally people will read the book from front to back, and so there had to be a flow to it. And so, yeah, there, I mean, I had a whole wall of post-its, right? And I was like
moving things
moving
around.
like, yeah,
Yeah,
certain comics around and like, oh, well, does this flow? And I think the first attempt that I did, I sent it to my editor and she was just like, no, like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know, I've never done this before. And so she really saved my butt and helped me, you know, these are the things you want to think about. Here are some
that's editors are
overarching
important.
themes. Yeah, that maybe makes sense to be grouped together. And then yeah, so there were some areas where like the transitions between themes, there was a gap. And so it's just like I had to create new art or
Work
new
to fill it in.
writing to fit and to bring those pieces together. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I can always like watching something where like Kirby and Stan Lee were real famous for like they're creating the Marvel universe, and they would they have editors who go and see it's like, oh, this doesn't make sense
Mhm.
in the continuity of these really long arcs. And they have these like long stories going on, and it's like, hey, sometimes they would backfill.
Yeah.
So like a new issue would actually go and explain something that was kind of weak,
Yeah.
and it was like so they'd go back and reimagine
Yeah.
it.
Oh, by the
But
way.
by the way, this is what happened here. Here's the detailed scenes we didn't throw in. Here's another
Yeah.
extra 4 pages of stuff to explain what's going on. Um, but it's interesting that, editors, like in music too, like you'll be sitting there as a musician and you think like, "Oh, this is it." and then your producer comes in and say, I don't get it.
That's not it.
It's just like you have to go back and he's like, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I he's like, you're so
Mhm.
invested in it, and then
Yeah.
you're too close
Yeah.
to it. So
Yeah.
then you gotta have this other set of eyes look at it to kinda,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's not really what you know, it's not that's not the bee's knees, that's not it." That's not it's
Right.
but
I mean, that's definitely something that I feel like appeared in, my works for kids. So, you're familiar with manga and the themes. I mean,
Mhm,
there there are a number of times in which I had first drafts or even second drafts completely torn apart because, the editor or my agent didn't feel like they felt like it was too subtle to reach a young audience. Because I feel like in Japan and in Taiwan and in China also, um, there is a subtle level storytelling,
mhm.
and they don't necessarily, like, sugarcoat things for young
No, they
audiences.
don't hit you over the head, and sometimes it's really subtle.
Yeah, yeah, and
It takes, like,
so
a lot of issues to get to something where the pacing in the Western world might be like, "You need to pace this faster because they don't get it."
yeah, yeah,
They
or
won't they
they're
don't
gonna fall asleep,
they
but
don't have the
yeah,
patience to figure out this in 10 issues, they wanna know in, like,
yeah,
next issue. They were
mhm,
like, "Well, why well, the
yeah,
patience." Well, no, they don't want that.
yeah, and so, for, the books that, come out in the US, they do end up vastly different than how they started out in my head,
Mhm.
and, these works, even though it's my name on it, they are highly collaborative. There are so many people behind the scenes with their fingerprints on it, guiding it so that it is the best book for the readers that are, that they're looking to get the book into their hands. So, um, the changes and the evolution of the visual narrative is also really interesting to observe as an artist because it's not just my work anymore, right?
So, you call, like, Oxford Boy a picture book. So
Mhm.
in the world of comic books, you have, like, graphic novels and you have these, like, extended comic books, but so when you refer to it as a picture book, it's totally just, uh, that's what it is. It's not a graphic novel, it's a picture book, but it might be telling a story.
Yeah, so, picture books, there are words in my picture books, but they're largely yeah, I mean, the visual aspect of it is still a huge part
Primary
of it, and it's, geared towards kids between the ages of 4 to 8.
for the age, so that's why it's not
Mhm.
in the kinda graphic novel, it's more like young adult.
Yeah.
Adult is in that
Mhm.
space.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times, like, I've been drawn into, work that maybe doesn't have as much words in it, because it's more there are some comic book artists that will go and have pages and pages with no words
Yeah, yeah.
because they're trying to like a guy like Paul Pope is kind of famous for his work with, like, this concept called THB, and there'll be sometimes, like, pages and pages of, like, no words.
Yeah.
It's actually, like, it's just storyboarding it out, and I
Mhm.
find that
Yeah.
really I like it. I think it's cool because you're making me drawn into the image,
Mhm.
and the image is telling the story like a painter,
Mhm.
and
Right.
I find that very I like it. I like it desirable. Some people might want to, "Oh, I need to be somebody has to explain to me what's going on." I was like, "Well,
Mhm.
why? I don't need to have the explanation because I like to get the feel
Yeah,
from it,
right,
from
yeah.
the work itself."
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I think, wordless picture books, wordless graphic novels, wordless comics are so enticing. It's almost like a little treasure hunt for me sometimes
Mm,
because the fact that they made a deliberate choice to leave words out, right? And
yeah.
so it almost heightens my senses to look for meaning, or to make meaning, right?
Yeah, but you're kinda
Collaboratively.
pulling
Yeah.
out the story, it's like
Mhm.
'cause, like, it's a s on top of, like, a musician, we create a sound painting. We
Mhm.
tell the story through the sound.
Yeah.
And if I put lyrics on it, then I'm kinda directing you in a certain way. If I don't
Mhm.
leave the lyrics, I make the sounds represent
Mhm.
the feeling, right? So,
Mhm.
it's a different I'm giving more trust in the listener, that I don't
Yes,
have to hit them
yes.
over the head and say, "This is X,"
Yeah.
and the Y is X, and then X
Mhm.
is Y. It's like, no, I'm gonna let them decide.
Yeah, yeah. It's very freeing, very powerful.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. But so Oxford Boy, is that just a one shot? You're going to continue to develop it as or multiple books, or just one book was taken from the webcomic?
Oxherd Boy it is one book collection of the webcomic, and then Big Enough is basically the first original story. It's the origin story of the
Oh,
Oxford
so you're
Boy.
continuing with Big
Yeah.
Enough. Yeah, because I was going to
Yeah.
second to that.
And then there's gonna be a second, like a follow-up,
Oh, wow.
picture
So you're
book to Big Enough. So it's right now primarily moving into the children's space. Yeah.
showing the space.
Mhm.
Has anyone approached you to try to turn it into like a streaming type of property or a film
Oh,
property?
like an animation?
Yeah, is there because it seems like to me that it would be beautiful, but I
Mhm.
would be I don't know, because the way I like things that are done by human beings,
Mhm.
and we're in an age where people wanna go and put things into AI just 'cause they can do it
Right.
quicker, but you
Yeah,
said the
yeah.
time it takes to do it is
Mhm.
part of the allure, like, is
Yeah.
the work that you put into it is like that human effort to create
Mhm.
that art, and
Yeah.
so, what are your thoughts of like putting it into this digital world as a film or TV project?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of Studio Ghibli
Mm,
and some of the, illustrations that I did for the picture book were inspired by, some of the images that you find there, so,
yeah,
you have, like, that giant frog,
yeah, that's awesome.
and the fireflies and things like that, but, I've talked to some animation studios or, my agent has, and, the thing is that gongbi painting, because it is so detailed, it's actually quite difficult to animate, and so I like, if we went in that direction, the art would actually look quite different, and I'm undecided on whether that's
Whether you,
something I'm
yeah,
willing to give up.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be more interested if you could capture it, even if it's difficult to capture what you're doing in the book on the
Mhm.
film as close to it as you could. If you get like
Right.
99%
Yeah.
there instead of like 60% there,
Mhm.
because that would be the thing that maybe differentiates it from other things. And
Sure.
that's why I've always been the kind of artist like, well, if it's not been done before, why not? Because that's the secret sauce is like if I create it and it's harder, right? And it's not
Yeah.
easy and it's very different, then
Mhm. Yeah.
that's the marketing effort is like
Yeah.
that's
That's
what it is.
the
That's the unique
uniqueness
thing is
of
like this
the
stands
work.
in yeah, it stands on its
Mhm.
own as a unique new type of work.
Sure. Sure.
And some people always want to just fit things into boxes.
Mhm.
We living in
Yeah.
the music industry, people just wanna reuse the same things over and
Right.
over,
Mhm.
and it's a trap that people get into because like, "Oh, the algorithms just want this," but it's already
Mhm.
there. Why do I wanna put something into some big zone where it's already people doing that? Like, why would they do that? I
Yeah.
have no interest in doing that.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you actually have this unique picture book, less words, more meaning from less words,
Mhm.
very, unique take on art.
Mhm.
Which I think deserves its own audience, it deserves its and if people from other areas like the Disney fans and anime fans and the Marvel fans and DC for whatever, if they like it, they can come to it, but they shouldn't try to change it.
Right,
Get
right.
into it and like it,
Mhm.
and maybe I wanna see more, but I
Yeah.
don't wanna turn it into Disney because Disney already exists.
Yeah.
It's like, why would I do that?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that, yeah, from my perspective, there's pluses and minuses, right? I mean, I understand why an artist or an illustrator would be very tempted to work with Disney or DreamWorks or some of these big animation studios because it can put their work into the hands of even more people and more people to appreciate and enjoy, and there's an allure to that. And then I also understand it from the opposite perspective, right? It's just like, yeah, why not? stick with what makes your work unique and see how far you can take it and
Yeah.
bring people along for the ride. That's also very exciting. So I think, yeah, right now, if you had to like make me choose between one or the other, I would choose the second. I would try to keep things in as similar a style as possible and just see if you just have to find like-minded people who are willing
Yeah.
to explore it with you, right?
Well, it's like the law of attraction. You put something out there and, the people come to it. You find they're like your tribe because that's what happens, like, in the world of, like, art, like, when people kinda are on the outside of the bell curve and they do the thing that's, like, on edgy, it's like
Mhm.
something new. And I always go example of this is, like, Bob Dylan
Mhm.
was not somebody that the studios ever thought would be would
A
work.
hit.
'Cause
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
'cause his voice, and it's like
And
he
his
went to
look.
Colum with his look, it's like he went to Columbia Records and, like, they had Sinatra.
Yeah.
They had people like Nat King Cole and stuff. It's like, who what's this voice? And the producers were like, they couldn't get over because like, I can't fix this voice, right? But people started looking at the lyrics,
Yeah.
and the lyrics were actually more important than the voice.
Mhm.
And then the voice suddenly became, like, iconic to go with the storytelling that he could do.
Yeah.
He opened it up for all these writers and singer-songwriters that
Mhm.
didn't have to have perfect pitch, didn't have to have a perfect voice, could
Yeah.
actually be different, like the Lou Reeds
Mhm.
of the world, the other people who would come along later and not have that perfect voice,
Yeah.
which was
Yeah.
demanded in the genre. So sometimes when somebody comes out of, that's not even in the canon at all, it's
Mhm.
totally outside the canon, it's people will say, "Well, that's not even art."
Right.
And then other people say, "Well, that makes it art."
Yeah. And I do think that, comics and, science fiction, all of these things started, in the fringes, were not respected or recognized as art or,
Yeah,
real
comics were, like,
literature,
thrown
right?
they didn't even
Yeah.
have, like, the Eisner came along in the US
Yeah,
to actually
right,
give
right.
them a like,
A
this is
place, yeah.
worthy of going in a gallery.
Yep, yep.
This is worthy of being studied in art school,
Mhm.
and it's not just pop art, get the Andy Warhols, like, he was, like,
Yeah,
he out there and, like, yeah, this is, like, legitimate art, it's not just pop art. It's
yeah.
something that's, like,
It's not
that's
a
beyond.
fad.
It's
Yeah.
not a fad where, that's what happens, like, even popular music, the Beatles, at first, they were just another boy band, really.
Mhm. Yeah.
And they became like the standard, like the gold standard for pop
For rock, yeah.
writing,
Mhm.
and they started off like a teen band, teeny bop band.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so, like, what you think is throwaway, not worthy, not real art, now is the gold standard of pop singing.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think part of that is actually yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, part of it is also allowing yourself to change as an artist and to allow your creativity and your creation to mature with you.
Mhm.
Because, yeah, like you said, like, the Beatles started out with one look, one image, one sound, but look how they changed even in such a short amount of
Yeah,
time.
they evolved to being like,
Yeah.
"We don't tour, we just write."
Yeah.
And then they became, like, avant-garde, really kinda edgy
Yeah.
advanced songwriters, like with Abbey Road being like one of the first progressive albums,
Mhm.
and it was being like how do you go to that
Yeah.
from
Mhm.
Love Me Do? It's like it's exponential growth
Yeah,
and
yeah, you
getting
wouldn't
sick.
expect it, yeah,
Yeah,
but it's amazing.
and
Mhm.
that's what I love about some people get tied to an artist, right? A lot of times they'll like artists will break when they're like 17, 18 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
And then,
So
when you're
young.
25 and you decide to go a different direction, all the people that love you, like, only love the work when you were 17. Well, you're not 17
Yeah,
anymore. It's like 8
yeah.
years 8 years later, it's like,
They
look,
wanna keep you in that place where they remember and loved you the most, right?
yeah, because like, you have the work you're doing now with Oxherd Boy, man, might be, like, your biggest like, one of the biggest things you've done, right?
Mhm,
But at
yeah.
10 years from now, when you're 5 years from now, when you decide to do something different,
Mhm.
you get the fans always wanna hold on a lot of
Yeah.
times to a
Mhm.
snapshot in an artist's life,
Right,
and
right.
they don't always, like, follow their, the artists
Trajectory,
they love
right.
because they wanna pigeonhole
Mhm.
me, like Prince was
Yeah.
pigeonholed into Purple Rain. Always gotta play Purple Rain. He was way beyond it, doing
Yeah.
anything else, but it's like
Mhm.
everybody wants to hear that, and
Yeah. The
that
crowd
becomes
pleaser. Yeah.
like an albatross, on your neck. It's like, okay, that's what made me the money, and fans like it, but Imma here, and there,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he would have, sometimes he wouldn't do it. I saw him one time when he was a period of his career where he would not play songs from that
Oh,
record,
wow. Yeah.
and he was very adamant about it because, like, "I'm not there.
Mhm.
This is where I am now." Now that's hard because a lot of times if you're an artist, you gotta satisfy the fans, but, like, if you're in a
Sure.
new phase as, like, an art, you're doing new paintings and new work.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's fine. You like what I did 8 years ago, but
Mhm.
this is where I am now.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, come along or not, I mean, it's all good.
Yeah, it's just so what's next for you on other projects in terms of direction? Because you say you got the Oxherd Boy planned out for additional, projects.
Mhm.
Are there other properties you're working on, other things?
So I have an idea that's been percolating for a little while in that I want to take just one scene. So it could be like a window seat, and
Mhm.
you just see the seat, the window. You can see a little bit outside, and then you see the books kind of around it on shelves.
Oh, wow.
And what I wanna do is I wanna start a new account in which they're all scenes of this window seat, but each image, there's gonna be something different about it. It's gonna
Oh,
tell a
that's
story, like,
awesome.
you see, like, the cherry blossoms outside, and then or, like, in another scene, you see, like, it's like a graduation scene or, like, somebody's moving off to college, and then so you see through the window, like,
It's
the
like
kid
this
is
evolving
driving
scene.
off.
So it's almost
Yeah,
like
and,
an
like
evolving
yeah.
scene, but it's got,
Yep.
like, some static
Mhm.
element and then
Yeah.
our element that's constantly
Yeah.
changing.
Something
That's
that's fun,
cool.
yeah. So,
That's really
like yeah, I wanna engage, again, like, the wordless thing where it's just like, what's going on in this scene? The audience has the opportunity to tell the story about it. I'm just leaving some clues. Yeah.
Well, I think that's great because that's kind of a writing technique that, like, I think, there's a famous writer that wrote, like, "A baby's shoes never worn," like, a newborn
Mhm.
shoes never worn, and it was a famous I forgot which writer wrote it, but, it's not mine. But the idea was from, like, from my teacher was that draws you in because you don't know, like, what's going on here.
Right.
Why weren't the shoes worn? Is that, like, some
Mhm.
tragic thing? What happened to the baby? What's going on?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they like, when you leave something open and it's not totally spelled out,
Mhm.
it's kinda that way to kinda pull you in. So
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, those prompts are so, so interesting because no 2 people are gonna come up with the same exact story.
yeah, 'cause like, you leave that window scene changing all the time,
Mhm.
but you have that window
Yeah.
is the static thing, and then that allows you a lot of room
Mhm.
to create
Yeah.
something from something that seems like, well, that's very static, but it's not. It's somewhat
Mhm.
like, on its face, you might think, "Well, that's the same thing," but then you look at it, it's like, "Oh, it's not the same thing."
Yeah, yeah.
So it draws you in because 'cause they're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, what
Yeah.
is different?"
It becomes more interactive, like a conversation, right? Which I think sometimes, on social media and in the digital environment, like people are just like scrolling and like it's just going in, going past them, and so to have an opportunity to just like catch someone,
Get
stop
people to slow
them,
them down. Yeah.
yeah, slow them down. Yeah, I think it'd be a lot of fun. Yeah, yeah. But now the challenge is, do I need to map out all of the illustrations in my head first so that they follow a certain sequence, or
Yeah,
should I
or
just
let
let
it
it
go
flow? I
flow-state.
don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Well, that's the cool thing about, like, when you collect things, you could actually put that
Oh,
level of
yeah.
editing in,
Mhm.
but when you're
Yeah.
putting it out in the world, it could be kinda like fusion modal
Yeah.
jazz.
Yeah.
'Cause, in fusion modal jazz, you might have a structure, right, of what you're gonna
Mhm.
do in that session,
Mhm.
and it's very kinda loose, but there is a structure. But then,
Yeah.
once you get there, you just trust the rest of the people that
Right.
they got their
That it
10,000
comes
hours
together.
in, and it's
Yeah.
gonna come together. Now you can rearrange it
Yeah.
and edit, and you go back and do some
Mhm.
overdubs on it to tighten things up,
Yeah.
but really, that doesn't happen till you get to the edit phase where each individual song now is put into an album,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
then you have the potential to do the editing,
Yeah.
which is the same thing you could do with anything you're doing, same
Right, right. Yeah,
collector.
it's true. Mhm.
then you could do that. So if you then you don't have to be stressed about the sequence because you let the sequence be what it is. And if you
Mhm.
want to go back and correct it for a full like release,
Mhm.
then you can do it at that time.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, not being tied to a particular timeline to get things done in a certain way. Yeah.
Yeah, then
Thank
they
you.
end up
That's great
well,
advice.
that's my fusion mindset.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love it.
It's like I think a lot. I always try to say to people like a lot of things in music can apply to other forms.
Yeah,
That's
I
been my
believe it.
goal with the podcast is to kind of show creativity, even if somebody's not like a writer or they're a painter or whatever.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things in the space in our spaces that they're symbiotic. They're same idea. They
Yeah.
come from the same kind of mindset
Mhm.
or ether. It's like
Mhm.
it's like, oh yeah, that is relatable.
It is, yeah, yeah, and it's awesome when we can make those connections and share that wisdom and that advice, yeah.
But it's interesting you said there's like a lot of your work, it might be just tagged like with your name, but there's a collaborative effort that there's other people behind the scenes. That same kind of thing in music is you have a headliner, but then you're like, you had the engineers, you had the roadies, you had the mixer guys,
Mhm.
all these people behind the scenes, and they don't always get the spotlight the,
Right.
the because like you're the headliner, and then there's everybody that got you there or
Mhm.
helped you get there.
Right,
So
right. It's
that's
true.
interesting.
Yeah.
If people, and that's just the way the nature of art is sometimes there's a lot going on
Mhm.
before you get to that stage or before you put it up on the wall, before you
Mhm.
put it in a store or put it where somebody can download it. There's all these other steps going on. It's not that's it's kind of a collaborative effort in this space, right? You're usually
Mhm.
not by yourself. You're usually got other people helping.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that, I feel, especially in the States, this kind of, lone genius, mentality where, yeah, like, there's, like, a a big name, a creator, a musician, yeah, the headline kind of image of somebody, and there's this assumption, yeah, that they are the genius, that they are amazing and do all this amazing work somehow in isolation, which I mean, I bet for the vast majority of creatives, is just not true at all. So I don't yeah, I mean, I understand that, like, maybe from a business aspect, like, you kinda just have to have that one, like,
Yeah, it helps
well-known name, right?
helps to
But
sell it. Yeah, 'cause nobody
yeah.
wants to know like the 100 names behind the scene.
Yeah.
But it's like on a film, people always skip the credits, and he's like, "What? There's a lot of people that worked on this
Yeah.
besides the director."
Mhm. Yeah. I
So how did
remember, my brother-in-law, he took a film class, once, and ever since then, because his professor just ingrained in the class how important everyone is to making a film, ever since then, for the last 20 years, he has sat through the credits for every single
everybody
movie that he's watched
see
just to
who we
just
know?
to show respect, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is
Well,
yeah.
that's I think it's important because, like, if you look at a film, it's like there's so many people.
Oh, yeah.
And I was talking to a
Mhm.
film director on the show, and he said it was like sports, or he said it's like and he was a musician too. He said, "It's like when
Mhm.
I'm playing with my band.
Mhm.
If I don't have everybody aligned on the scene, from the script, editor to the acting coach and the lighting guys and the cinematographers, there's the special effects people, they all have to be on,
Mhm.
and they all have to
Yeah.
be synced for that scene to work, or we're
Yeah.
doing it again and again
Yeah.
and again.
Otherwise, it
And
doesn't happen, right?
yeah, it's that kind of teamwork, but you see are the actors.
Right. Mhm.
You don't and maybe the director, you didn't see, like, there's, like, 100 people on that set.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to get that one scene the way they wanna
Mhm.
capture it, and
Yeah.
a lot of times it's the people behind the scenes that kinda or the people in the collective. Like, if you're at an
Mhm.
art collective and he's like, "If we go with, like, 10 other artists to do a show,
Yeah.
we're probably gonna get more traction if we just go one by one."
Yep. Yep.
If we all show
Mhm.
up together and we're like, "Hey, here's a theme. We're gonna have a theme today is this type of art," and then
Mhm.
we have multiple artists in that genre in the same space, you're gonna have
Mhm.
more likelihood there's more people gonna
Yeah.
be there.
Right, right, and you draw from a larger community that's interested in that theme and not just because they're like a groupie for a particular artist.
Yeah, and then there's cross pollination. You might get
Mhm.
an idea to collaborate with
Yeah.
another artist, and people give you an idea like, oh, we know now people are fans of this one artist, and now fans of this artist didn't know it was in the same kind of wheelhouse.
Mhm.
Or
Yeah.
it's yeah, I just think that's what people want. They want to get out of their isolation
Mhm.
post-pandemic and go out to a gallery, go out to a library, go to the store and talk to people and find out like what's really cool.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
new? What's interesting?
Yeah.
Have you
Mhm.
been doing like book shows or cons, like fantasy cons, art cons, like comic cons, things like that? Have you decided to go
Oh,
that route?
like going to conventions and things?
Yeah.
I haven't, no, I haven't actually. Um, so for, the Oxherd Boy, I did some author talks, at, like, different art centers and things like that. So that was a lot of fun because they were small groups, and it's like you
Mhm.
said, like, it was an existing community of, um, like-minded creatives who were just interested in seeing and sharing what we were doing. And then for Big Enough, this picture book, actually, most of the events that I've been doing have been at schools or libraries. So,
Mm.
not necessarily speaking with other adults or other creatives at this point, but actually just talking to some of like our youngest readers and our
Youngest
youngest
readers? Well,
artists,
that's a
right?
cool approach, the way
Yeah,
you talk to
yeah.
the readers. It's a
Mhm.
different approach. I mean, are you, like, thinking of maybe you'd wanna go on a bigger tour? Because you're on the podcast, are you thinking,
Mhm.
"Oh, I'm gonna go and talk to more podcasters, I'm gonna talk to maybe radio interviewers or different people?"
It's possible. I think that, yeah, so one of the talks I did actually recently was, more, very similar to this podcast about writing and creativity and how we tap into those aspects of ourselves even when we don't feel inspired.
Mhm.
And so I think that I think I would have a lot of fun just sharing my perspective about this um, because because I did, start my creative career relatively late when I was in my mid 30s, I guess. I don't
Mhm.
know if that's late or not. It feels late to me.
Yeah.
um, but and then also just in the very strict like Taiwanese studio kind of experience,
Everybody starts like
which
when
yeah,
they're
which like is very
teenagers
different.
or
Yeah.
before that maybe. Well, that's what
Mhm.
the art phenoms are always like, "Well, I started at 7 years old,
Yeah.
on piano." Like, everybody's expected to start, like, super young.
Right, the prodigies, right?
Prodigies is like, "Oh, yeah, they're just playing Beethoven at 8,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
you got it down," and like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
okay."
Yeah. So, yeah, so if, like, sharing my story about, like, pursuing a second or third career when you're on the verge of middle age and still being able to, um, find your voice even in a very strict, studio environment, I think if that's the kind of message that helps people and
I think that
inspires
resonates
people, like,
because
yeah.
as people know, there's, like people put a lot of ceilings on themselves.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
talking about the glass ceiling, but a lot of ceilings are self-imposed.
Mhm.
And when you get, like, someone like yourself comes on and shows, like, you're not done because, like, you didn't make it when you're 21, right?
Right, right.
That you open up a world, and there's a lot of, like, in certain musical genres, like the blues, like,
Oh,
you
yeah.
could start when you're, like, 55,
Yeah.
and
And almost you want to because you
you gotta
have
have
that
the age
wealth
to
of yeah, well, it's like there are some genres that they really lend themselves to
get older.
yeah, when you're older, when you have stories and experiences to share, you have a wealth of experiences to draw artistry from that a 20-year-old wouldn't
Yeah,
be able
yeah,
to, so
17-year-old blues person is not as, credible as the 55-year-old,
yeah,
it's
well,
just
they would have had to live through a lot in those 17 years.
yeah. Not that there aren't guys that did it, Hendrix was, like, pretty young when he was doing it, he
Mhm.
wasn't like Lead Belly or Robert Johnson, but, like, it's just to get can you tell the story?
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
like, if you can tell the story and it makes it you make it believable,
Mhm.
then the age might not matter as much, but is it
Right.
really, like, your creative capability? If you actually can
Mhm.
envision yourself at 17 to beat a 55-year-old and tell a story that's convincing,
Yeah.
it can work. It can
Yeah.
work. You know,
Mhm.
it's happened, but, I wanna thank you for being on the show because it always goes by quicker than we ever
Oh,
imagined.
thank you. No, this has been a lot of fun.
And we do have your link there, reginalinke.com.
Yes. Mhm.
And, if people go there, is that the best way for them to get in touch with you and find out where all your work is?
Yeah, that's the best place. I have all of my contact information there, and if folks are interested in hearing more about, my journey into this creative career, I also have a newsletter called Behind the Stylist, in which I detail a little bit further about, the ups and downs of my work and, where I plan to take things next.
That's awesome. So we do wanna encourage people that the URL that's there below, reginalinke.com, it was fully clickable on all the platforms we're on. We've just been on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We'll be on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon, other channels by tomorrow. And I wanna thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thanks for the work that you do.
Thank you.